All right. Thanks again, Dana. Appreciate it. Welcome, everybody, to our first Take a Saint to Zoom of the spring. This is a bit of a replacement of the programming we have typically for spring break and fall break week. We have an opportunity called Take a Saint to Work in normal years, where students are able to go job shadow in person on site at various locations. But because, a variety of factors this year, including no spring break or fall break built into the schedule, we wanted to still give you an opportunity, students, to some of our alums and employers that we know, so you can get a chance to get a little bit more information about their field. So, Brad, I want to thank you for your time again and welcome you. And I was wondering if you could give our students here a brief introduction of yourself.
Sure. Thanks. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Dana. Appreciate it. Glad to be here. So I graduated in 2010 from Aquinas. I had a political science and economics degree. And I was actually, I was a little bit older at Aquinas. I took 3 years off before coming to college, what I kind of retroactively call a triple gap year. So I graduated in 2010 and then quickly moved down to Washington, D.C. And so my plan was to work in policy and foreign policy in Washington. I'd had opportunities to do fellowships down here while I was a student, and to do some work while I was a student. And so I've been down here working ever since, so now over a decade. So I started my career working at a series of think tanks in Washington, working on foreign policy and economic policy, writing papers, book chapters, and things like that. Then moved into a public affairs firm for a few years, and for the last about 6 years have been working on the business side at Politico, which is a global media company that covers the intersection of power, politics, and power, or power, politics, and policy, based out of Washington and around the country and in Western Europe. And so I've been there for about the last almost 6 years, where I now run all of our US-based corporate advertising and sponsorship. So I oversee a team that does all of that, that allows us to pay for the journalism that we do every day. So that's kind of me at a high level.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And students, I want you to know this is an open forum as well. So I have a list of questions here that I can ask, just guiding the conversation. But if any point in time, any of y'all have anything you would like to get answered or like to chip in, feel free to drop it in the chat, or just like raise your hand. There's a few different reactions at the bottom, and I'd be happy to let you ask your question. But the first thing I wanted to ask you, Brad, you mentioned fellowships down in DC right after you graduated. So after you graduated, how did you work your way to DC originally?
Yeah, so originally while I was a student, I was actually, one of the things I was involved in a lot of different activities at Aquinas. A number of them were, I was very involved in the Student Senate and student government. I was also involved in Model United Nations and in Model Arab League. So I don't know if any of y'all have been involved in any of those things, but one of the main organization actually that organizes the Model Arab Leagues that AQ takes and participates in, actually runs a fellowship program in Washington every year. And so I got a fellowship through the National Council on U.S. Arab Relations to spend the summer. There was a financial stipend, and they have a whole program. They placed me at a nonprofit working for the summer in Washington. So I was able to do that. I actually continued working for them on a contract basis when I came back to AQ my senior year. And so then when I graduated, I moved down, and I actually started graduate school and did my master's program part-time while I worked full-time. And actually part of my moving down to DC was I'd been going through this process my senior year, knowing that was my goal. A friend of mine, Dan, who had graduated, I think 2 years previously, had recently returned from doing Peace Corps, and he was also moving down for grad school. And so we were kind of bouncing ideas off each other and trying to think through, how do you find housing 1,000 miles away at a city you've, only lived in for a couple months at a time, and just not the easiest. Lots of time on Craigslist, and hoping that you don't end up in some kind of a crack den. But and so all these like conversations with each other, trying to figure out and how we're going to do this, we're finally just like, look, why don't we just like get a 2-bedroom and just do this together? And so we ended up, the first year that we both lived in DC, we just like got a 2-bedroom, and it was great. So we extended the AQ connection down to DC, and have since connected with other folks, other alum who are actually down here in the area too.
Yeah, that's great. We hear that from a variety of alums, just that connection to another alum, fostering opportunity. Will, so you gave us a brief overview of what you do in your work, but could you tell us a bit about what the day-to-day is like?
Well, the day-to-day now is different than the day-in-day. The way I answer this question now is very different than how I would have answered it a year ago. But so I'll talk about before, and then which I think might be helpful. Then I can talk about now and how we've adapted, I guess, if that's of interest. But so my day-to-day is pretty diverse in that. So my responsibilities are, I lead a team of, there's 6 people who directly report to me, and so we're responsible for building and growing relationships we have with corporations who leverage Politico, our various platforms, our website, our app, our newsletters, our podcasts, et cetera, in order to engage our audience and to tell stories about their brand, their executives, what they're doing. Everyone from Walmart to AT&T to Google and Facebook, and all of those folks that you've heard of and probably use some of their services, really find a lot of value in engaging our audience, because we reach folks who are influential decision makers in the public sector and the private sector, people who are making policy, who are sitting on corporate boards, et cetera. So a day in my life, usually it's kind of a mix between internal meetings, because I see a big part of my job is being able to facilitate my team to be able to do their jobs really well. And part of what I've learned about being a good manager is to hire great people and give them what they need to be successful. So it's a lot of internal meetings to understand what are the challenges my team is having, how can I get them the resources they need, how can I clear obstacles that they have in front of them, how do I make sure that other departments around the company are getting us what we need in order to be successful. I'm also meeting with the folks on my team to put out flyers, to help them think through and solve challenges, to think about like, how do I approach this specific situation with a client? How do I think through this particular conversation? I was meeting with the chief marketing officer at Intel, and they really have this vision of doing this thing. Like, what is it that we could build for her to bring that to life, right? So some of those more creative conversations. I meet with clients as well for a big chunk of my time. And so I meet with executives that are clients. I meet with executives of people who should be our clients and aren't yet. During normal times, I take a lot of lunches, a lot of drinks, a lot of dinners. A part of my job is being a vocal evangelist and standard bearer for our brand and who we are and what we represent, and kind of embodying Politico in the market to folks in Washington and other cities where we operate. So before times, I spent a lot of time up in New York, usually up in New York every 2 weeks, travel to Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago, Miami, other types of major markets to meet with clients. And then it's all the work about just managing folks. Right now, we're in the middle of doing our annual reviews, and so it's a lot of time writing reviews and going through and doing skill mapping for all of my employees and all sorts of fun stuff like that. But so it runs the gamut.
Awesome, thank you. Appreciate that background. We have a question in the chat. Will, would you like to read yours aloud, or would you like me to read the chat?
I could do it. Thank you for coming today. My name is William Wolf. I'm actually, I'm a first-year student, but I graduated high school in 2017, so I had that 3-year gap year as well.
Nice.
But I was wondering, what was your inspiration like growing up or going through school, or what showed you the passion to go into this type of job field? And what was a big factor at Aquinas that helped you prepare for this career?
So uh, probably the biggest influence for me from a high school perspective was my sophomore year. I got involved on the policy debate team at my high school and got very involved with debate. So I would travel around the country and compete at tournaments. And so I was reading a lot of politics and policy and philosophy, and became really passionate about everything kind of at that intersection of policy and politics, and knew that that's something I wanted to do. So when I came to Aquinas, one of the first things I did, I'd never thought that I was going to go to Aquinas. I'm from Grand Rapids. I grew up here, well, there, I guess. Just never really thought about it. I'm not Catholic, wasn't raised Catholic, and always knew the campus was pretty. We'd go there for picnics, but that was about it. But it's really, the fact that I ended up there was really a testament to the faculty and the staff there, because when I showed up from my very first tour that I took, they knew that I was interested in political science and economics. They introduced me to Doc Durham, and I don't know if any of you have taken any poli-sci classes with Doc, but was immediately like, wow, this dude is incredibly passionate, like seems like he's on cocaine, even though he's not. And he's just like so much energy, and was clearly someone who was incredibly passionate about his students and about his work. And everybody I met was smart and open and welcoming. And so it was really kind of an easy yes for me, a surprising one. But I absolutely loved my time at Aquinas. And I think that once I was there, being involved in the work through like Model UN, Model Arab League was great. Being involved, I'll say, in student government was incredibly valuable experience for me, because we just got to go and learn how to actually do things. Like, I mean, like the practical aspect of like running committees, getting stuff done, actually deciding on an agenda for the year with, my friends, and saying like, here's how we're going to go out and accomplish things. Where I have to get other people bought in, folks from the programming board, folks from the administration. I met, very frequently with for when it was me, it was Dr. Baylog was our president, and folks in his administration. And that was a really, really vital experience to actually see how you can actually implement things, do work, was really great. And then the opportunities that it opened up for me to actually go to Washington and do those things. And then also from an academic perspective, obviously I felt very prepared for grad school. One of the things that I started was something called the Aquinas Undergraduate Research Foundation, which may or may not still exist in some capacity, but does love it. And I really started because I wanted to go do research and present papers. I got accepted to present a paper at this symposium organized by Harvard. And I was like, great, where's the like funding for this? And they're like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, oh, that doesn't exist. I guess I better just like create it. So like going through that process of just like figuring out how to build things, and okay, who do I have to like talk to in the different offices? Who do I have to talk to in development to actually start a foundation inside the college, right? So those were all, and the fact that at Aquinas, it's such a luxury that it's like a small enough school where like you can just like get your hands dirty and like go do stuff. Where like if I were at like U of M or something, like there's just way too much bureaucracy. And here you like you can just like go talk to the dean of whatever and be like, I want to do this thing. Like, how do I do it? And that's incredibly valuable and has been.
I have a question. Hi, Brad.
Hey, what's up, Bridget?
How are you? So when I started at Aquinas as the alumni director, Brad was, I think, just a junior maybe. But I had the pleasure of like you would see him all over on campus. And so when he talks about being involved, it wasn't just like I attended a meeting. You can hear the words that he's using, right? Like I started and I initiated and I went. And I think sometimes students are waiting for permission to do these things. And certainly this year has been crazy. So I wonder, and all of these things that you started definitely made you competitive for the fellowship, because they don't just let anybody do that. So like what words of wisdom or encouragement do you have to our students to like literally like you can do things, you have agency, and like did anyone give you that permission? Was that some like a relationship that you had with Doc, or did you just, is this how you've always been?
I mean, I was always kind of a um, uh, uh, I always have had an approach that was kind of anti-authority, in the sense that I wasn't particularly interested in people telling me what I could or couldn't do. And so I think there's a string of that. Honestly, Dave Wynandy from the communications department, who I never took any communications classes, which is weird given what I've actually done for the majority of my career now. But Dave was, throughout my time student government, was the faculty advisor for student government. And I'd developed a really close relationship with Dave, and he was definitely a huge driver of like instilling in me this notion that just if it's broken, go fix it. Like just do it. Like don't wait around for anybody to like fix it for you. Don't ask for, wait for something to happen. Just like go build it. What do you need? Like figure out how to fix it. So yeah, Dave Wynandy is amazing at that, and very much inculcated this sense of like, why on earth would you like wait for anything? Like just go create the whatever it is that you want to exist. So that was really, really powerful, and I think kind of was important in setting that course.
Awesome, thank you. And I think there's another question in the chat from Sebastian.
Yeah, hi, I'm Sebastian Ayan. I'm also a first year student, and you mentioned about interviewing people and hiring people and giving them what they need to be successful. So what do you look for when you're hiring people, and also when you have to also manage them after, like they're employees now, and basically any tips that you would give to anyone who is going to like an offense and be managed in those cases?
Yeah, so I think I interview a lot of people, and I've hired a lot of folks. I think that there's a number of things that I think I look for. Obviously, there's some amount of experience that you want to demonstrate. I think there's also importantly is kind of like a self-awareness about what it is you actually want to accomplish. Why are you applying for this job? What do you want to get out of it? How does this fit into what you're trying to accomplish? With an understanding that, like, particularly for more junior entry-level roles, like you're not going to have some grand 10-year vision for your career. Maybe you will, but like that's never going to happen. Like, I mean, that's just the reality, right? Like if you'd asked me at any point what I'd be doing 5 years from now, like I was never doing that thing 5 years later. Which is totally fine. But like you should have some sense of like, why am I actually interested in this organization and doing this role at this company? So one of the things that I often counsel folks who are asking me about career advice is to kind of think about your career, particularly early on, as kind of filling up a toolbox. And so, you're certainly not going to have your dream job when you're 22 years old. You're unlikely to have your absolute dream job ever. You can have parts of it be your dream job, absolutely, right? But you're not going to probably have every single box checked, right? Sometimes you're doing something you love and you're passionate about in your role, but it's maybe at an organization or a company that like isn't your first choice. Sometimes you're at like your dream company, but you're not yet in a role that is super satisfying, right? Sometimes you have the title you want, but not quite the money. Sometimes you have the types of responsibilities that you want to be doing and the money, but not quite the title, right? There's always going to be these things that are probably not super like the absolute pinnacle of perfection, and that's totally fine. That shouldn't be the expectation. But so you want to go into I think these job interviews and just as you're thinking about these, is like with some kind of a clear-eyed understanding of like why you want this job and what you want to get out of it, right? And especially early on in your career, it should be like, look, I'm super hungry. I'm really interested in pursuing this avenue. I know that these are some skills that I've developed already that I can deploy in this situation will make me successful. But I'm also just like a go-getter who wants to just like figure out if this is what I want to do. Like 3 years from now, like, is this the path I want to be on? I don't know, particularly, if I'm 21, 22, 23 years old, but like, I really want to throw myself into this world. And I think that I could be successful, and I'm going to raise my hand and do anything I can to kind of get ahead and give this kind of my all to see if it's right or not. Like, that's something that is super valuable, I think, no matter what you're doing, because like, the fact is, for an entry-level job, like, you're not going to be like, you're not coming with a huge long resume. I mean, you have internships and things like that probably, which is great, but like, the skills that you're going to be, the actual hard skills that you're going to develop in an internship, even the best internship, is like, doesn't compare to someone who's been on the job for 10 years doing something, right? So it's fine. It's like, what is it that you bring to that table, right? You can bring a hunger, a dedication, an interest and curiosity in growing, in seeking knowledge, and in kind of continual improvement. Like, that is incredibly valuable, particularly for people who are more junior in an organization. So I would encourage you to kind of think about that and how you present that to potential employers.
We had 2 questions come through the chat. Actually, the first one is from Cam, who says he has to head to class, but before he went, he wanted to get this question answered quickly. But as he prepares to graduate from Aquinas, what advice would you give him as an outgoing senior?
So I would say that presumably around, like, I mean, to some degree, it depends on what position he's in from like a professional perspective, right? Assuming that he's looking for a job, looking for what to do, like, I would say to think about things that you want to try, right? Like, narrow down the list. Obviously, like, if you're just like, you may be in a situation where you're like, you just need any type of job, right? And if that's the case, then so be it. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're in the position to kind of narrow down your opportunities, I would say, look, think about all the potential things that you might want to be doing someday, all the people you potentially know and you have access to, and just start having conversations with folks to understand more about their industry, what it's actually like to do those jobs. I read a ton, I always have and still do read a ton of bios of people, like on websites, on LinkedIn, spend a ton of time on LinkedIn, just to get a better sense of people's actual career trajectories, right? Like, you can get a sense of like, hey, one day I would love to be a vice president of engineering at Steelcase, right? Like, well, what's the career path for that? Like, go to LinkedIn, find everybody who's a vice president of Steelcase and like see what they've been doing for the last 12 years, right? And like, start to talk to those people. And if like, figure out like, okay, those people have this type of graduate school, looks like at some point they like worked this type of place, like maybe you'll find that they have a slightly more eclectic background than you would have initially thought, right? Maybe you would have assumed, oh, they worked at Steelcase 12 years ago and worked their way up. Maybe they started as a school teacher and lateraled in after going to get a master's degree. Maybe they like worked at, some smaller engineering firms, like whatever. Like, get a better sense of like what the potential pathways are that can open up your aperture of types of jobs that you might want to consider that you maybe wouldn't have thought would get you to where you might want to go. So it's all about kind of expanding and narrowing opportunities early on, right? Picking different things that could lead you down interesting pathways with an eye toward things that could give you something to fill that tool set, right? Develop some kind of skill set that'll position you to take on that next role, that next job, either at that company or somewhere else. And like, lean on everybody or that you could know, anybody you're 2 degrees away from. And then my last piece of advice on that, as far as like the networking piece, is that you should find some kind of a project that you're working on that will give you an excuse to reach out to people and connect with them beyond just like, I'm looking for a job, right? So whether that is, starting a podcast, talking to a professor who's working on a book, and maybe you can help them do research for the book and give you an excuse to reach out to people and say, hey, I'm helping doing research for this book. I know that you're an expert in this field. Could we just talk for a while? I'd love to just like pick your brain about something. Maybe you can just like, I know that I started a blog early on. Blogs aren't really a thing anymore. I'm old, but like whatever the current version of like a blog is, right? That's like about whatever the area is that interests you, right? Start a new Twitter feed that's just about like providing content about like whatever your professional interest is, a blog, and start a Discord, right? That's the thing now. Like start a dedicated Discord. Now I don't know, but to have some kind of a project that gives you an excuse to reach out to the people that you would want to reach out to for a networking coffee or whatever. But it just completely changes the orientation of that meeting from, hi, I'm a 22-year-old recent graduate. I'd love to talk to you to like network and get your ideas about my career. Like that's fine, and there's people who will be willing to do that, but like that's a very different conversation. They think of you like in a very different way if it's, you know, Bridget, the like 22-year-old who's looking for a job, versus, oh yeah, if she's thinking about, you know, who you might be a good fit for, recommending you maybe for a job. It's, oh yeah, Bridget, this super smart like young woman who she just graduated, but she's actually working on this book right now about you know, the whatever, about goats in, you know, Antarctica or something, right? Like super interesting. Like she has a biology degree, now she's like researching goats. It's wild. You should talk to her, right? Like it's just a whole different conversation if you have a calling card that's some kind of a substantive project, and like you can just make it up. Like getting back to that thing of like, you don't have to wait for somebody to hire you. Like hire yourself to just do something interesting. Like, and then just like have that be the thing that you are doing until you find a job. Like, so that's some of my advice I often give, which I think helps in the networking piece.
Thank you.
Do you need a note? Are you going to be late now? Oh, you're muted.
I live close enough to the school. I should be fine.
Okay.
Thank
You
for
tell
your
them.
time
You
today,
tell
guys.
them what you were doing, and I'm sure they won't mind.
All right. Thank you.
See you, Cam.
See ya. Thank you for coming.
Sure.
Bridget had a question in the chat, but I also saw a hand raised at one point, but it appears to be gone now. If you raised your hand and you're interested in sharing, feel free to jump in right now. But if not, Bridget's question in the chat was, what's your favorite interview question to ask potential candidates?
So I typically ask, I actually stole this one from a colleague of mine who started asking people toward the end. And so now I do this now as well. And I ask, what is the question that I should have asked you that I haven't? Which often surprises people, but I think it's like not a gotcha question. And it really gives them a chance to kind of think on their feet and kind of think about like, what is the element of my background or about me as a person that like I haven't gotten a chance to talk about yet, that like maybe isn't evident on their resume or hasn't come up in the conversation, but it's like really pertinent, and I just wouldn't have known about it. And so that's one of my favorite questions to ask people, I think.
I do a fair amount of mock interviews in my role as the career coach, and I liked that one, so I just jotted that down. That was a good question. Another question came through the chat just about the recruitment process. I'm not sure what grade level this student is, but just for a typical entry-level job for your company, what does the recruitment process look like, and how long abouts does it take?
So we are always hiring, first of all. Tell your friends as well as yourselves if anyone wants to move to DC and work at a media company, but in lots of different roles. So it depends. So we're essentially, there's roughly three parts of our organization, more or less. The first is editorial. So the biggest part of our company is our newsroom. We have a 300-person newsroom, and that's editors and reporters. And so the channel there is a little bit more specific. You need some kind of a journalism background. We do have fellowship programs, particularly a lot of our career development and pathwaying for the last several years has been disproportionately focused on creating pathways for individuals of color and folks who wouldn't traditionally have access to journalism. And so we have a number of fellowship programs, paid internship programs for folks to gain experience doing policy reporting in our newsroom. We have the biggest policy newsroom in the world. And so that attracts a lot of interest in people who want to cover healthcare policy or energy policy or things like that. Otherwise, it's a lot of folks who do reporting, get some kind of a journalism degree, oftentimes undergrad, sometimes go to J school for graduate work, and do reporting elsewhere, and then tend to get hired in from other types of media publications, other types of news outlets. From all places. As our newsroom has expanded over the last several years, there's a lot more people we hire in now who are like folks who have a graphic design background, who are like visual news producers, who are video news producers, audio news producers, et cetera. So folks like that, some kind of experience there. Then we have essentially two big tranches of our business. The one is what we call Politico Pro. That's a paid policy intelligence service. So that's organizations pay like $10,000 to $100,000 a year for access to a specific type of policy intelligence product. That is has a whole like sales and client services staff against it, and they hire a lot of fairly entry-level folks, a lot of people who kind of have like 1 year of work experience, and they're always kind of hiring because for that division in our company, they're looking for people who are young, hungry, interested in some kind of sales, client management, who are interested in talking to people, who are kind of competitive and want to hit goals and things like that, and are rewarded for that. Then you have my side of the business, which is kind of functions almost more in a lot of ways like a consulting arm, just given kind of the relationships that we have with our clients. And so we're smaller from a headcount perspective, the same size, we're 50-50 as far as revenue. And so I normally recruit folks with a broad array of backgrounds, from different strategic communications and public affairs firms, folks who have done in-house communications or marketing at companies, people who have worked at digital media agencies. We definitely hire more junior folks, normally people who have some kind of a background in digital media, digital marketing, who have worked at agencies or things like that is normally the folks that we draw upon for that. And yeah, and so we have a ton of jobs that are open that are always listed on our website, politico.com/careers, I think. And we have a whole HR and recruitment team that screens folks. And then we have hiring panels for open positions. So yeah, I've hired 3 people over the last year for my broader team since COVID, 4, I guess, maybe, who we've started and onboarded virtually. But that's kind of the background for us.
I was going to jump into a internship opportunities question, but I didn't know if I should defer to Bridget for that, as she is our internship coordinator. But I just didn't know if internships are frequent at your company, if it's a good opportunity for students to check into or anything like that.
Yeah, so we do have internship. We do like one internship at any given time on my team. And then there are internships specifically for the editorial as well. And so I think a Google of like Politico internships would probably turn up some things. As I mentioned, I think that the bulk of those resources, candidly, right now are focusing on individuals of color and people from underserved communities, just given the diversity issues with kind of elite level political and policy reporting, and just reporting in general is just historically been like super white. And so we've been trying to do what we can to address the pipeline issues there for a few years now, but there are definitely internships available.
Are you ready for another question? Oh no, there is another question, sorry.
Oh,
perfect. Question asking is my brand.
Serve it up.
Erwin has a question.
I was wondering, what was the like a challenge or the hardest part of starting your career?
I mean, I think there's a lot of things that are tough when you're starting a career, even aside from being able to, obviously, like finding jobs that you find are meaningful, right, is like the hardest part. My actual first job when I moved to DC was I internshiped on Capitol Hill. I got a fellowship while I was in grad school for about 4 months. I thought I wanted to work in Congress. then I worked in Congress for 4 months and realized I did not want to do that, which was also very valuable earlier in your career. Just as valuable as finding out what you do want to do is finding out what you do not want to be doing, right? And like the stakes are super low when you're like young. So I'm very glad that I found that out when I was just out of college and had very little skin in the game. So, and wasn't stuck pursuing a job on Capitol Hill. I mean, it's hard navigating finding jobs. It's also, for me, moving to DC, and particularly then wanting to work in like foreign policy is just like crazy competitive. And so one of the things that was a big challenge initially was that there's a lot of folks in that world who are like super over credentialed. And like you got all these people with like master's degrees from Harvard and Princeton who are applying for unpaid internships because it's just like so competitive to be working in like foreign policy and there's so few good jobs. And I'm like, Jesus, you know, I think I'm like smart enough for like, I've read books, but like, I don't know, like Aquinas was a good school, but I mean, it's, you know, it doesn't have the swag of like, you know, an Ivy League institution, obviously. And so you've got to be like, how do you flex what you have? And so obviously it was helpful for me to go to a more kind of a bigger name brand school for my graduate education. But even that was like, I mean, I went to Johns Hopkins, which is a very good school, but I mean, also not Harvard. And so you've really got to like hustle and feel like, how do you meet the right people and sell yourself and convince people that and make an impact outside of what's on your resume. It's one of the big reasons why I did not want to go to graduate school full time, because I'm like, look, I need that qualification, but that's not going to be enough, right? There's going to be a stack of resumes on everyone's desk that have like, you know, a grad school as good or better than my grad school. Like, what's going to be the distinguishing characteristic? And so figuring out how you can distinguish yourself. What are the things that you can do on the side? What are the things that you can, the relationships that you can build, the things you can become known for to differentiate yourself? I think that was the hard thing for me. And so luckily I was able to do that enough to get employed at the right places. And but that's tough. That's tough.
I have another question. So along those lines then, Brad, if you were to describe like your personal brand at this point, what would be your pitch?
So I think that my personal brand is that I am super passionate about the work that I do and that my team does, about politics and policy, about media. Hopefully it involves me being somewhat intelligent about those things. But I think that a lot of my brand is tied to being an evangelist for the things that I'm passionate about. And in the professional world, it's very much that I have a kind of a big personality. I'm out a lot. It's been a very tough adaptation for me during COVID. I mean, thank God I've, like, all things you know, being equal, I've been incredibly fortunate. But I mean, I'm used to being out every single night, you know, drinks, parties, cocktail parties, dinners, etc. And so just being out and about and present and enthusiastic and an evangelist for the things that I care about is a big part of my brand.
And so I didn't take a poli-sci or communication class the whole time I was at Aquinas, and really feel like I missed my chance. I know it's never too late. So
I've heard that you get discounts for auditing, Bridget.
Yeah,
a little birdie told me.
I can just sit in on Doc's class, but so like recently I became more passionate about politics, I would say. And you know, people say, oh, you know, politics is so dirty and, you know, I don't want any part of that. Like, and media too, like politics and media have not gotten a great reputation in the last year. So like, how do you reconcile that? And how do you, you know, I don't know, how do you respond to people that are like, oh, I want nothing to do with politics?
I mean, I take a kind of paternalistic aspect to this or approach to this, and I kind of always have, like, for better or worse, which is like, I never begrudge anyone for not caring about like politics, right? Like, people have a lot going on in their lives, right? They have like families and sick parents and like jobs, often multiple jobs, trying to meet ends meet. Like, I don't begrudge anyone for being like, I'm not going to read that white paper from, the Cato Institute about like tax rates and, whatever. And I don't, like, I'm not going to read this book to understand the nuance of the Green New Deal. And like that's fine. Like, people shouldn't have to do that. I think that's why we should have elected representatives who actually act in their interest and on their behalf in a genuine and authentic way, in a less opportunistic way. But at the end of the day, I mean, we're talking about making decisions that impact people's lives, and like the stakes of the decisions that are made and as a result of politics and the broader policy formation process, right? Like, yes, there's like what you hear about or see about if you turn on CNN or Fox News or whatever, grandstanding in Capitol Hill, where there's oftentimes not a lot going on, but there's a ton going on in the legislative branch, right? There's like the decisions that are made at the center of Medicare and Medicaid are like massive. They affect hundreds of millions of people, literally, and about like life and death decisions. Like, the impact of what these oftentimes nameless, largely thankless civil servants are doing day in, day out, like meaningfully affects like everyone's life and like the direction of this country. Like, whether or not like the decisions that, who would have thought that like the decisions that people made about whether to regulate or not regulate having to put weatherization on your energy grid in Texas, like, that sounds super boring, right? Yeah, until there's a storm and people are dead in Texas, right? Like, I have a bunch of family in Houston. Like, the impact of boring decisions about energy regulation really like come home to roost when like people are freezing to death in their beds. Like, these decisions matter for people, whether even though they're like wonky. And I think it's really, really important, and it's so much beyond the grandstanding that you see on TV, which I agree is like awful and like stupid. I mean, like that's not what like policy is. That's not how policy gets done, right? But even that said, like, they're probably about to pass a $2 trillion like bill, right? Congress passed that's an insane number. Like, $1 trillion is like a billion, and like, I mean, there's like this the amount of money that's going to be spent is like very hard to even grasp your mind. So like, things happen for sure. And then from like a media perspective, like, look, I work at a nonpartisan media company whose entire reason for being is to provide accountability journalism so that the American people like understand what their government is doing, right? All the stakes of the decisions I just described, like, only function, there's only accountability and visibility into it if there's like nonpartisan, nonpartial, real, honest journalism being done to understand what's going on, right? Like, our reporters like break stories every day that no one would know about the things that are going on if not for their work, right? Our reporters broke the story that seems like 9 million years ago now, when like Tom Price was HHS secretary and realized that he was just like using taxpayer dollars to fly on private jets wherever he wanted, like to friends' weddings and stuff. Like, that was just like our money, your money, right? That he was using he was just stealing it, right? And like, no one would have known about that if like reporters weren't out like looking for the receipts. Like, that's important work. And so like, I feel really, really great about like the work that we do every day and the importance of this entire system. Like, even though it can like look messy and sometimes it's shitty, like, it's super important.
Great. I'm going to give that answer when I encourage more people to look into politics.
Yeah, one of the main things we talk about, I teach an entry-level career services class called Career and Self-Awareness, and one of the main things we talk about in that class is finding a career you're passionate about more than finding a job. So I appreciate your insight on that. And we have a question in the chat as well, specific to Politico. Sebastian was wondering how important social media and knowledge of tech is for careers in that field.
Yeah, I mean, I think that baseline comfort, familiarity with technology and social is super important for basically everything now. I mean, unless you're going to be, I mean, in a highly technical field. I mean, if you're going to be a doctor, like, you probably don't, you can get away with not understanding the total nuances of that. But in something that engages in kind of the culture at all, like, you've just got to have a basic level of familiarity with technology, and and that's just like the nature of the world. And so I think it's important. And like, you don't need to necessarily, you know, have a coding background, but like, can't hurt, right? Like, so whatever you can do to like flex those skills and develop those skills is probably beneficial, and it's only going to become more so.
Sebastian, did you have any follow-up on that?
Not really. I think that covered a lot of it, but yeah, another thing is with, like you said, with another question of everything being so political, how can Politico basically stand out as a news source with everything being so political, like everything social media? Like a lot of people, especially my age now, they learn all the news from like Twitter, Instagram, all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, all those platforms are super important for us. And so, I mean, we have, you know, millions of followers on Twitter. Like we have social media editors, which we didn't have 4 years ago. We have whole content teams dedicated to putting out content every day on Instagram. You can follow us on both those things. We've got a really good Instagram presence, actually. The stories are really good. They help you understand what's going on. We've got great, like, as I mentioned earlier, like we've invested a lot in hiring really great graphic designers and data visualization people who really flex on those types of platforms, because it's super important for us to meet our audience where they are. And increasingly, that's not just our website. We're actually, this about 6 months ago, we crossed an important threshold, which is we became officially a mobile first platform where the majority of our traffic comes from mobile phones. But it took us longer probably than most, just because we skew a little bit older and a little bit more professional in our audience. It's still 60 million people a month, but like it skews a little bit older. But I mean, that's at the core of anybody who's going to be working at a content. I'm hesitant to just kind of call what we produce content, because it seems a little bit like quality neutral, like, oh, it's just like a thing to look at. And like, there's a lot more that goes into like the thing that we're presenting than just like a TikTok video. Not that I don't enjoy my TikTok videos, but like any kind of content creation enterprise, right? And I guess at its very core, right, like our business is built on creating content that develops a meaningful audience, and then we're able to monetize engagement with that audience, right? Like that's the life cycle of our business. That's what perpetuates the production mechanism. Right, like anything that's doing that has to be super cognizant of how like habits around content consumption and production are evolving, and like we're not immune to any of that.
That reminds me, I don't know how much you follow film, but there was a big controversy last week in film because Martin Scorsese said films are no longer, now it's content, and he had a big problem with that, and I echoed that. So I thought it sounded similar. But so we have about 10 minutes left, students, and I have a few follow-up questions jotted down, but I really want to make sure that you get an opportunity to get your questions answered. So I really want to encourage you to use the chat if you have a question, or go ahead and unmute and speak up right now. That's totally fine. But I'll give it maybe 1 minute for the students here before I ask one of my follow-up questions, which is a bit more AQ specific.
I have a question about networking. What do you think, because obviously you have a bunch of experience with that, what is something that like, because sets like you apart when you're like, I'm attempting to network, because I'm a freshman right now, and it seems very daunting because I don't have a very big network of like professional people. So I feel like what would be something that set me apart when I'm talking to a possible employer in the future at like a networking event or something like that?
I would say definitely, like, back to kind of my earlier point, like to lean into developing some kind of a project that's like maybe related to, but independent of just like your schoolwork, right? Like think about what it is that you can do kind of independently or with a group of like friends that like creates, like that becomes your calling card, some kind of a project, some kind of initiative and effort. Start an organization. Like, do you know what it takes to start a 501c3 organization? Like 2 pieces of paper and $20. Might not even be $20, right? Like anybody here could like become the CEO of a nonprofit organization. Like you could do it tomorrow, right? Like like do that, then like reach out. Like you're probably going to be the only person who they reach out with and say like, hi, you know, whatever, you know, I'm Connor. I'm actually the president of the, you know, the Happy Rabbit Foundation. I've been following your work. I'd love to have a few minutes. And they'd be like, oh shit, this person's like actually super young. They're the president of a foundation. I'm intrigued, right? Like you could do that, right? I remember I took a coffee with this kid, never met him before. He'd found me on like LinkedIn or something. He asked me for a coffee like 7 years ago, 8 years ago. He was an undergrad. He had said he's like already had started this company and was doing these other things. I'm like, this kid's crazy. He's already like doing all these things. He was like, I ran for, you know, I was last year I ran for office and, you know, for like dog catcher in this Maryland town where I'm from or whatever it was. I'm like, wow, this kid's really going places. I'm like, what can I do to help this kid? I'm like, it's so weird. He's so young though. Like now his name is Tim Wang and he's the CEO of the company called Fiscal Note, like a global multi-million dollar company that bought CQ Roll Call and like just bought like Oxford like intelligence services in London. Like this kid's like a mogul. He's, you know, 28 years old maybe. And I remember he was like, you know, sitting down with me for coffee and he was just like, oh yeah. I'm like, this is so wild. This kid's like so young and he's doing all this stuff. Like, I don't know if any of that stuff was real at the time, but he managed to like fake it till he made it. And now he's like, you know, king of the world. Like there's definitely a fake it till you make it element to it for sure. So I guess maybe that's the point.
And you can start with just starting a club at Aquinas. I mean, that doesn't even cost $20, right? And I see so many students on their resume saying like they're a member of this club or a member, and in a nice way, I say like, okay, so what, right? Like you went to meetings, like, but did you start something? Did you invite someone to come and speak? Like, do it. And Connor, you can make an appointment with us. We can like direct you if you need some direction. But I think what I love hearing you say, Brad, is like, just do it.
That's copyrighted, Bridget. The Nike lawyers are going to come after you.
Go out and do it. Brad says.
Perfect.
I'm curious, Julia, as the only female student on the call today, like, could you let us know like what interested you about meeting Brad today?
Well, I'm just kind of exploring my options, and this sounded really interesting, so I figured I'd see what it's all about, and I'm enjoying myself so far.
Glad not to disappoint.
And I mean, look, how many students do we have at Aquinas? And there's how many of you? 9, right? I want to point out that Brad has his email address as his, I don't know if that was intentional, Brad.
Oh, I think I said, it's because I'm in Zoom like all day, every day for work. So I think it just Zoom just logs me in when I'm doing a Zoom. It's like my work Zoom. But. So
I don't know if you're like inviting people to email you, but the thing is like all these alums, they say, oh, you know, contact me or follow up with me on LinkedIn, and nobody ever does. No one ever does. Yeah. And so like, what would set you apart, Connor? If you follow up with Brad with an email.
Well, actually, step 1. Dave Wynandy talks about that. So speaking of, I mean, one of my favorites at Aquinas as well, but Dave told Bridget and I, he gave his cell phone number to like a group of 500 interns at an event 2 summers ago when we could still have large group events. And he was the keynote speaker. And the 2 of us were amazed. We're like, you gave your cell phone to all of those people. He goes, one person.
Call. Yeah.
One person will call me. And true to his word, one person did. It was like a CMU student who was really impressed with him and followed up and asked for advice. And so I guess to Bridget's point, it's really important to follow up.
Yeah, honestly, like once the world is like, y'all can get back to class, or I guess like you are, I was exchanging emails with Doc actually like a couple of weeks ago. Sounds like there's things are going to be back in or are back in person, but like seriously, like I would email Dave Wynandy, like see if you just like carry Dave's bags for a few months, just like hang around Dave Wynandy, like you will definitely be better, smarter, or more prepared to like take the world by its ankles if you just like hang around Dave.
Yeah, that's definitely great advice, students. So make sure you jot that down if you haven't. But yeah,
Free. That guy charges a lot of money for consulting. Like you could get it for free.
Right.
I'm just saying.
Absolutely. And he's a communication professor at Aquinas, for those of you who, first year students who haven't heard the name before, but which I generally tend to advise students to take that class if they can with Dave, because it's very, very useful and you learn a lot. But any other questions out there in the gallery as we wrap up the last few minutes here?
Cool.
Doesn't look like it. Well, Brad, thank you so much for your time today. I know how valuable it was for me, so I can assure it was very valuable for our students as well. But we really appreciate it, and appreciate the opportunity. With this being a bit different than normal, it was great to have you have a chance to share your experience with our students. We really thank you for that.
Of course, my pleasure. I'm glad to connect with everybody. Yeah, feel free to shoot me a note if you have any follow-up questions or anything I can do you with.
Are you coming back for homecoming, Brad?
I don't know if I'll be coming back for homecoming, but I'm not really. I'm trying to be careful about planning for the rest of the year, trying not to get my hopes up. My parents just got vaccinated, which is great. I have not yet. Me and my girlfriend have not yet been vaccinated, so we're trying to just like play everything by ear.
Yeah.
I do love homecoming though. I've been in the past. It's great. Love the beer tent. Love seeing everybody. I still have a ton of great friends who are in Grand Rapids, and a lot of great AQ friends for sure.
And you're on the alumni board now, right?
I am. I've been on for two and a half years, something like that. Yeah.
Very good. Well, we have lots of virtual, I mean, we attended a virtual event. You weren't on the last one, but the one before that, I think, the wine tasting, right?
Yes, I did the virtual wine tasting with everybody. Yeah, it was fun.
That was fun. Well, thanks everyone for coming, and I'll make a plug to make an appointment with us again. Anyone can make an appointment, and Brad was talking about connecting with people on LinkedIn. There's this like super fun alumni search trick that we can show you, and you can spend a lot of time looking at alumni and their career paths. So
yeah,
make an appointment with us.
Cool. Thanks everybody. Go Saints.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks everybody. Have a good day.
Bye.
Thank you.